That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, we have had a lot of comments lately whenever we are going through talking about Treylon Burks, talking about Garrett Wilson, talking about who's going to be our top wide receiver in this draft class. We've had a lot of people coming through and telling us that we need to be going with David Bell here. And I will tell you right now, let's get ahead of this. No, he's not our wide receiver 1. No, he's not our wide receiver 2. But let me talk about why I think that if most people are jumping on the David Bell wide receiver 3 bandwagon, it may not necessarily be a great idea. Now, yes, he has some positives. He definitely has some negatives that we can talk about as well. And actually, that's probably a poor way to phrase it. I'll let you know what we mean later on in the video. But of course, before we dive into it, please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment letting me know how stupid I am. Because trust me, I know. You know I'm stupid. I know I'm stupid. We all know that I'm stupid. And also subscribe to the channel. Now, if you're watching this video just to learn a little bit more about David Bell and how he may stack up compared to some of the other wide receivers in this draft class, then yeah, this video is going to help you. But only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, this channel will be for you. This channel is going to be covering Dynasty Fantasy Football along with all these rookie prospects coming into the NFL draft this offseason. We'll be uploading a video every single day. And I promise you, if you don't play Dynasty Fantasy Football, 99% of the videos on this channel are not going to be for you. So please don't subscribe if you don't play it. And I think that should be it. Let's go through. Let's kind of give a quick background on David Bell here. And this is going to be a wide receiver, obviously, coming out of Purdue. There are a couple things that you like to see out of his profile. This is a wide receiver that is coming out after his true junior season. This is something that we've discussed a ton mattering with these players. If you're looking historically, I know it doesn't necessarily make sense on why it would matter, but if you just look at the numbers and you just have a large aggregate and you go, okay, we're only going to be looking at first and second round wide receivers in the NFL draft, and we're going to look at their success rate and just the amount of a bust that you have from players that came out after their true junior season versus players that stayed all 4 years in school. It's surprising to see that those players that come out after their true junior season, it is a mark that you need to check, and David Bell does check that box. Love to see it. And with David Bell, also 6'2", 205 pounds. So he has the size. You're not too worried about the size. And of course, I mean, this isn't official. You're going to have to wait until the NFL Combine until we have his official height, weight, as well as official testing measurables. But that's kind of why we're talking about the wide receiver position. I know everybody's tired of hearing me say it, but when you're evaluating these wide receiver prospects, there are a couple boxes that matter. A, breakout age. You need to see these players produce at an early age in college. B, you need to see a ton of production, but most importantly, production with context. I mean, there's a reason that you can't just go and say, okay, who had the most receiving yards in school? That's going to be the best player. Of course, it's not that simple. I mean, scouts, NFL general managers, millions and millions and millions of dollars get pumped into these systems every single year. So you can look at a ton of different variables and you can try to determine what wide receiver is going to be best if you're an NFL general manager. It's not as simple as going through and say, who is the most productive guy? Because of course, every wide receiver is in a wildly different situation. You have to understand the context. And also at the wide receiver position, you not only need to understand the context of their production, whether or not they were playing in a spread offense, whether or not they were playing with the school that only had 3-star wide receivers next to him versus a player like Terrace Marshall who played alongside both Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, to contextualize all of that into one prospect profile. But to go along with this, I mean, with a wide receiver like David Bell, we also need to be trying to look at the age-adjusted production as we've already discussed. There are just so many variables. It's not as simple as who had the most yards. Of course, that's going to be the case. But production, historically speaking, at the wide receiver position matters significantly more than athleticism. And that's why we're waiting right now to cover these running backs in depth until we get a better idea of what their testing is going to look like, as well as what their NFL draft capital will, because draft capital, size, and athletic testing measurables are going to matter so much more at the running back position than they will at the wide receiver position. Really, at wide receiver, you want to see that production with context. And right now, David Bell, if you're looking at our most recent mock draft that we did over there on Patreon, oh yeah, real quick, let me give a shout out to Patreon. There you can hop into a Dynasty League with us. You can go through, get in our Dynasty group chat. You can also at the same time get an in-depth podcast breaking down your Dynasty team, get our Dynasty rankings, get our Dynasty rookie draft guide. I mean, the entire community's over there on Patreon, of course. But nonetheless, let's go back to this. We actually did a mock draft over there on Patreon a week ago, and David Bell went at the 109, and he went as the wide receiver 4 off the board. Now, if you're looking at the wide receiver ranking video that I uploaded at this point about 3-4 weeks ago with my first initial thoughts before we had the chance to really dive in deep with this draft class, I had David Bell ranked at my wide receiver 5 spot. We got a lot of feedback telling me that was a little too low for him, and I agree with you. I think if you go through season by season and you look at this David Bell prospect profile, there are a lot of things to be excited about. I mean, starting off, what's probably most exciting is his freshman season. Because historically speaking, of course, we wrote a 100-page plus I want to say, bundle of information for our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide last year over there on Patreon. But we went through and we showed how important breakout age is at the wide receiver position and how you need to see those wide receivers breaking out at least by their true sophomore season. But if you break out as a true freshman, your chances at hitting at that NFL level are actually increased. And that's what happened with a player like David Bell. He comes out, and in Purdue, keep in mind, Rondale Moore is still there at the same time. And this is the most bullish case you can have for David Bell. He comes out and he posts over 7 receptions a game and about 85.5 receiving yards a game. Now, of course, you have to understand the context that this production was under. And in this offense, that 86.5 receiving yard per game mark actually accounted for 28% of the passing offense on a per game basis, which is, great in terms of a rookie number. Just a true freshman to come out and to have that percentage of your passing offense is elite. Not only that, but Rondale Moore, we kind of just said that Rondale Moore didn't play a single game, yada, yada, yada. Rondale Moore was hurt throughout his entire college career outside of his true freshman season. That's unfair to say because Rondale Moore did play this season. Now, he only played 4 games. And of course, with Rondale Moore, the production is a little hard to look at and say he played 4 games. This was his per game numbers because obviously he gets hurt on that 4th game. So maybe you want to look at it and just, I don't know. Let me put an asterisk out here saying Rondale Moore got hurt. But he actually himself averages almost 100 receiving yards a game, but he's in the same ballpark as David Bell. David Bell, as a younger wide receiver, comes out and essentially averages the same amount of receiving yards per game as Rondale Moore. While yes, Rondale Moore was with a small sample, while yes, he did get injured, so there does need to be an asterisk with that. But nonetheless, it does illustrate that David Bell had an incredible true freshman season at Purdue. Then he had that full-on breakout as a sophomore. He comes out, he has 8.5 receptions a game, closing in on 9 receptions a game. He has over 100 receiving yards a game at the same time. And what's really crazy to see is he actually accounts for over 50% of the passing touchdowns with this Purdue offense this year went to David Bell. We were wanting to just bow down to Treylon Burks for getting exactly 50% of the passing touchdowns in his own offense. But here with David Bell, he had more than that. Now, of course, we have to be fair and say that this was a small sample. This was only a 6-game sample. Obviously, the weird COVID year, yada, yada, yada. And also, Rondale Moore, he played this season. Rondale Moore played 3 games. So he played half the games that David Bell did. And of course, we need to put the asterisks on this because Rondale Moore did get hurt. So it's not completely fair to say. But Rondale Moore, yet again, as an older wide receiver, keep in mind, he went in the 2nd round last year in the NFL draft. He actually averaged 90 receiving yards a game compared to David Bell up there at 104. So that kind of gives you just another example of David Bell looking like a great wide receiver prospect. He comes out as a junior. The numbers don't change that much. Yes, the receiving yards per game bump up to 117, but this entire offense just went up with their passing volume. So the percentage of that offense accounted for was very similar with 34%, but that's not a number to overlook. That 34%, just knowing that he was able to sustain that back-to-back seasons, and this was over a larger sample, you can be excited about that because our minimum threshold that you need to see for these wide receivers is going to be 29% based on our historical research. So with David Bell here, he checks every single box. And this speaks on the strength of the wide receiver draft class. And like I said, I think we misspoke earlier just talking about that David Bell had red flags on the profile. I don't necessarily think that David Bell has that many red flags at all. I mean, the production profile looks fantastic. Now, I mean, based on what I am reading, now keep in mind, I can't find any just official high school numbers that you had from him testing coming in to Purdue. I apologize for that. Based on what I am reading with people that are going out there and just turning on the game and watching, like, obviously that's not a good way to go about it in my opinion, but people are saying that he's not going to be an elite level athlete. And for that reason, with the draft capital, it's a little bit different than David Bell. Because just going through and looking at the rookie wide receiver landscape that we have this year, David Bell, I don't think many people are going to try to make the argument that they should have him over Garrett Wilson. I mean, if that's your argument, sure, you go for it. I'm not doing that. We're taking Garrett Wilson. But with David Bell here, where the argument's going to come into play is for that wide receiver 3 spot. And nobody's going to put him over Treylon Burks. You put him over Treylon Burks, you're a crazy person. But at that wide receiver 3 spot, there are going to be 3 different wide receivers, in my opinion, that are in contention. You got Chris Olave, who obviously, I mean, a year ago, everybody would think that that would be his job. Then you also have Drake London as well out of USC, and you have David Bell. Now, what's intriguing is if you look at these 3 wide receivers that, I mean, for dynasty purposes, I think are in a similar boat. For real life NFL mock drafters, it looks like that may not be the case. And really quick, let me go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the video with draft capital not mattering as much at the wide receiver position as it does at running back. Because of the running back position, draft capital is everything. Because at running back, draft capital means you're going to get the opportunity. And at the running back position, opportunity is king. All you need is those touches. Where at wide receiver, you actually not only need to be able to get on the field and get opportunity, you need to be talented enough to draw targets. And by that, you have to generate separation. You can't be Bryan Edwards. Y'all know we did not like Bryan Edwards coming out of that 2019 draft class for a multitude of reasons, but one of the reasons he couldn't separate. Now, and I apologize, going back to 2020. That was the 2020 class. But nonetheless, just kind of wiggling our way back here, another reason that draft capital doesn't matter as much for wide receivers as it would for the running back position is wide receiver is honestly a bad label to put on these players. Because the more you look into it, the more you just think about how NFL offenses run nowadays, there are so many different kinds of wide receivers. This is something that we talked about, I mean, just pretty much over the past 2 years. In the case of someone like Henry Ruggs, the analysis the entire time was he would be better for an NFL offense than he would be for your fantasy team. I mean, with the speed that he possesses, that's going to be something that NFL general managers, they value highly. Because when you have that speed, you're able to go through, take the top off the defense, and you're able to allow other players underneath, like Hunter Renfrow, to go through and draw targets. And those are going to be the perfect examples. Obviously, with Henry Ruggs, going to be in prison, yada, yada, yada. But we can use this perfect example to illustrate why draft capital may not matter as much of the wide receiver position. Because let's go over to wide receivers on the other hand, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, like Hunter Renfrow and, say, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who were both day 3 draft picks, I mean, in 2021, and I believe Hunter Renfrow was in 2020. But, I mean, if you're looking at a fantasy football standpoint, Hunter Renfrow has been more productive than Henry Ruggs would ever be in his entire NFL career. So, I mean, from a fantasy football standpoint, Hunter Renfrow, I mean, has been the more valuable player. And of course, I get it with Ruggs. This is an example. Now, if you ask the Raiders, what wide receiver matters more to your offense? It is Henry Ruggs, and it's not even close. Because Hunter Renfrow, I mean, a lot of the success that, I mean, he has and Darren Waller is based on having a field stretching wide receiver that can take the top off the defense without commanding a lot of volume from that quarterback in Derek Carr. You're not going to be getting a lot of targets. You're not going to be getting a lot of receptions. You're not going to be getting a lot of receiving yards. So from a fantasy football standpoint, you're not that appealing. Now, if you're a little bit slower, even if you don't have that draft capital, if you're getting on the field and you're the guy that's drawing the actual targets, you can be successful. So draft capital does not matter as much at the wide receiver position, as we've said, for multiple reasons. But with all that being said, the draft capital between David Bell, Chris Olave, and Drake London, it's a big gap. It's not like one of these players looks like he's going to be taken at pick 15 and the other one looks like he's going to be taken at pick 30. If that was going to be the case, you just go through, you take the wide receiver you think has the better analytical profile. But I think we have to look into this a little bit more Because Chris Olave right now looks like, I mean, if you're looking at NFLmockdraftdatabase.com, they compile a ton of mock drafts from everywhere just into one concrete number. And of course, this isn't an exact science. This is going to be something that changes drastically throughout the entire offseason. But right now, they have Chris Olave as the 15th pick off the board. So mid-first. They have Drake London as pick 24. So, I mean, mid to late first as well. David Bell is a borderline second to third round pick. Being a mid-first from an NFL standpoint to being early third, that is a massive, massive gap here. So I think that should go through and at least bring some thoughts to your mind and say, should we be reevaluating this? Because also, of course, we'll dive into Drake London. We'll dive into Chris Olave in depth as well. You go through and you look at the profiles from these players. Chris Olave, his true junior season, he had 104 receiving yards a game, and he averaged a receiving touchdown a game. He accounted for 39% of his team's receiving yards that season at a much better program than Purdue. So he accounted for a higher percentage of his team's own offense than David Bell did at the same age, in a better program with significantly more target competition, as Garrett Wilson was a true sophomore this season. Now, of course, with Chris Olave, he has his own red flags that we'll get to a little bit later on. But if you combine that with the fact that he is going to be a mid-first and David Bell could potentially be an early third, I think Chris Olave is someone I'm going to keep over David Bell in our rankings. Very similar. Drake London, who should be a first-round pick, he comes out his true junior season. He averages 135 receiving yards a game, which is good for 45% of his team's passing volume. I think that blows out David Bell as well. And he's, just as young as David Bell. So I think that David Bell, I'm going to keep him at my wide receiver 5. I know a lot of people want to push him up to wide receiver 3. And of course, all these videos I'm making, this is December right now. We are half a year away from the NFL draft. I promise you a lot of what we are going to say is going to change. I promise you this video may be outdated just in a month. But as of now, I think we're going to be having David Bell rather than, in competition with Garrett Wilson for that 2 spot. He's going to be further down than that. He will be at wide receiver 5. Now, of course, thank you all so much for being a part of the flock. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you have not done so already, go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. Of course, you can find all our Dynasty rankings. You'll be able to find our rookie rankings. You'll be able to find our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. You'll be able to find yada, yada, yada. Get into Dynasty League with us all over there on Patreon, which you can find the link to in the description of the live stream. And I think that should be it. I hope you all have a great day, and I hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.